And so yacht rock and soft rock kind of have a little bit of crossover, but soft rock kind of went a little bit more into the 80s.
Okay.
And had, there was some, I guess, rock bands that would do like Air Supply.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
More Than a Feeling, Boston.
More than a
That's it, yeah, right? That's kind of not yacht rock. It's more soft rock.
Okay. I really want to get my theoretical understanding down so that with the practical application.
So when you play...
I know what a lot of things are not yacht rock.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'm working on it.
Yeah. It's like when people go, oh, that's fusion jazz. I'm like, it's not. It's trad jazz or something else.
I always say that.
That's fine.
I always say that.
Well, it's fine. It's all right. That's all good. Welcome to the Integration Station. I'm your host, Michael, a child and adolescent occupational therapist, and with me today is my co-host, Eleanor.
I'm also a child and adolescent occupational therapist.
How are you today, Eleanor?
Good, Michael. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming back. I guess I don't need to keep thanking you for coming back.
I was just going to say, you could probably, now that I've been bumped up to co-host, I think it should be a given.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go with that. Well, good to have you back in the studio today. For those who are new, those who are long-time listeners, we'll be discussing how we can help the young people in our lives and support them through a Q&A format. So we'll take your questions, we'll throw in some of our own, hopefully find the fun in that learning. If you do have any questions, please send them through to our Instagram. Otherwise, podcast@otfcgroup.au is our email address. I don't get a lot of emails, but that's fine. I think people much prefer to use Instagram and just quickly
It's easy.
DM and whatever else to get that information across. So that's the plug for anybody that does follow us on Instagram. Send as many DMs as you want and we will answer as many questions.
Is that what you want to encourage? That's fine.
As long as it's related to the podcast.
Obviously.
I'm not filtering them, so thank you, Eli, our producer. Producer's giving us the thumbs up. Thank you. So this week, actually, we had quite a few questions come through about how to support non-speaking or high needs clients. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was interesting, that kind of a bit of a theme this week. So I tried to group those together. So we're going to have a discussion about that, but definitely have to start with our regular segments. Have you heard the theme?
I have not heard the new theme. I haven't.
Have a listen.
Therapy activity of the week.
That's it. That's the theme.
It's so good.
You like it?
I do like it.
So, therapy activity of the week.
What's yours?
Are you going to go with me first? All right. I did an activity on Tuesday with a client of mine where we didn't have anything set, and we've been working a little bit more on his decision making and being okay with something not being perfect, but an outcome that is still quite effective. And so we had.
That sounds good.
Yeah, we had I selected 5 random items. I said, okay, we're going to select I'm trying to remember what it was, like a hula hoop, some Skittles, beanbag, used a trampoline, and I think there were 5 or 6 things that we used. I said, look, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Here's a whiteboard. Come up with an activity using those items.
Okay.
And there's no right or wrong answer. You can do whatever you want. And came up with a really interesting game, and he was happy with the decision, and we went with it. And then throughout, we're like, how's this game going? It's like, well, actually, I'd like to add this and this. I'd like to change it. And I said, fine. So we adapted it. And then after, I think about 5 minutes of playing, I said, okay, using exactly the same items, come up with a completely different game. And look, this is a teenage client who's capable of being able to do this. But he came up with a different activity, and I think at the end of it, he was quite pleased with his ability to generate ideas in that moment.
Yeah.
What I know is that for some of my clients, that's really hard to do. So there might be some scaffolding that's needed there. Say, okay, well, how about we use that for throwing, or we can use the hoop to stand in, or that sort of thing. But for him, that freedom he took pretty well. And I thought it was a nice way for us to work on something which didn't have necessarily an outcome other than problem solving and generating an idea.
Yeah. I think that's
So-
awesome. I think that works on a lot of those executive functioning skills too. Spoiler for another episode.
Future
We'll cover off a
episode.
little bit about that in how we cover that in sessions.
Yes.
But I really like that. That's really cool.
How about yours?
I actually was thinking of a game that, I don't know if it's a game so much, but more maybe a tool to help with some scaffolding that you and I had done in a joint session together the other week, which was that conversation tree where we started off with a
yeah.
topic. And then I guess the idea is that, it's a 2-player game in inverted commas, where one person will start off making a statement about a topic that's agreed, and the other person has to ask a question about what that statement looked like. And they'll respond to that. And then throwing back to the question asker, they have to ask another question. So you're trying to support that reciprocal conversation, elaborate on that further.
Yeah.
And I think it's a tree adding on a different branch each time to the statement. Is that the idea?
So if I gave an example, so I asked you a question, and I said, do you know much about yacht rock?
And I might say, as the person that's responding to those questions,
Yeah.
no, I don't really know too much about yacht rock.
And then I would continue with a question from there.
Yeah, you have to get to 5.
5 questions. So I'd say, okay, what sort of rock music do you like listening to?
As far as other rock music goes, I feel like I like a broad range, actually. That's one of my, especially like alternate indie rock stuff.
Okay.
That's my jam.
All right. So not so much rock, but alternate indie music is your preference?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay. What are some bands that you like?
I have, it's such a big question
Okay.
that I'm now feeling stumped to answer. But I love like Grizzly Bear, the Wombats, the Kooks, that kind of thing.
Great. How many questions have I asked?
You think you're one more. But I don't know if we need to inflict that on everyone else though. But you get the idea.
Oh, yeah. And so you keep going.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's quite funny because I think my friend, when we had done that, was really great at generating those questions. And there was this awesome flow. And then we got to the end of the 5th question and it was like, right, my turn's over. It's like, oh yeah, very good. I thought we were in a really good flow with the questions, but I guess that was the outcome that they were working towards before we switched over.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So
But it was really helpful scaffolding for perhaps for someone that's maybe building that skill in that reciprocal dialogue and having to think about something else to ask of someone else without necessarily launching into maybe your own thoughts on something and just trying to find out a little bit more. I really like that.
Oh, right. Conversation trees on that, I think. So, yes, I know you mentioned we did it in a joint activity a while ago. I sort of did take that initial idea from a lot of if any listeners out there have played like role-playing games where there's sort of like a dialogue tree, say if you ask a question, it'll come up with a few responses and you keep going that way. And then it's almost like a schematic of there's a response for each sort of question.
Okay.
Now that's very much programmed in the game.
Yeah.
But if in a natural conversation, it's that same sort of thing where you keep asking from a question and you build from there. So in terms of where that comes from, I mean, you could just do a Google of dialogue tree or conversation tree and something would come up and it would give you at least a bit of a formation as to what's trying to be worked on there.
Yeah.
Well, Regstrat.
Regstrat. Let's do it.
Regulation strategy of the week.
Regulation, the strategy of the week.
Fusion jazz. Not your rock.
That's the theme for.
I love it.
You do?
I think I love the calming tones. I think that is very appropriate for Regstrat.
We got Marco Bablé to sing that. You know Marco Bablé?
I don't know Marco Bablé.
That's okay.
Oh, sorry.
He just got it.
I did.
Couldn't use the real person's name for copyright reasons, but yeah, Marco, good singer, Marco. I'll start with you then.
You gonna throw it to me this time?
Yeah, I'm going to throw to you for Regstrat.
I was actually chatting with a family yesterday about some oral regulation strategies. I saw a little person who will make kind of like clicking noises. It's been something a little bit more recent, happens a little bit more when he's tired. But interestingly, when he came through to do an assessment with me, with a person he hasn't met before in a space that he's not been to, that was quite prevalent initially. And the parent did comment, interestingly, that like, oh, that's probably the most that I would normally see him do that. And I couldn't help but wonder if he was trying to access regulating input in managing a lot of unknown factors, things that were less predictable. He was working really hard to do what he needed to, but just intrinsically was accessing things he had in his toolbox. So we talked through a lot of things around oral motor activities like bubble monsters. I think we've got a video on our socials around that, which is a bit of a favourite for kids. So, just a couple of drops of dishwashing liquid in a small amount of water with a straw.
Great in hot weather.
Great in hot weather. Great indoor activity or in the pool. And then you're blowing through the straw to have those bubbles form. And if you've got a little bit of the dishwashing soap in there, it makes the bubbles get bigger and bigger. So there's a visual aspect to it. I think, thinking about what that young person's needs might be, if that's something that might also help build out their toolbox in what feels good for them. So, that was one of mine for the week. There's lots of things you can do in that kind of category, I suppose. But that was a big one that we chatted through. What's yours? Regstrat.
A few things. Actually, it's not necessarily a regulation strategy per se, but we've had some hot weather here in Adelaide over the last few days and the weekend, and was down at the beach on Sunday morning, and I was down there with the family, and just the calming nature of I know some people don't like sand, but for some, the calming nature of the sand, I think I talked about kinetic sand in a previous episode, but the calming nature of the sand and the ability to dig and the deep pressure that's provided and that real heavy proprioceptive input, and even running through that soft sand.
Yeah, working against resistance.
Exactly, that resistance stuff was really, really cool, and just reinforced to me for those that tolerate that space and do really like it, because there are a lot of kids that love it. I've got a lot of autistic clients that just the beach is just their happy space. Yeah. They could just spend hours there. And obviously some that can't, but for those that can tolerate that, it's just this expanse of water and sand. Yeah. And it's so free, and it just provides a pretty peaceful environment, but also allowing for that pressure if you are digging in the sand or if you are wading in the water, and as you said, that resistance. Yeah. So I don't know if it's a strategy as much as a regulation space of the week. And as I said, there's more hot weather coming up, so
I can relate to that very much.
Yeah, and pools, like a pool or water, those that do like swimming, a lot of resistance from that as well. So cool, but regulating.
Yeah, good excuse to get down to the beach.
So let's get to some questions now. As I said at the top of the episode, had a few questions that came through about supporting non-speaking, high needs clients, and in particular on ASI and functional goals, targeting executive functioning. I think we'll commence with a DM from our OT friend Alyssa from the US, and she asks, how do you work with a non-verbal client in ASI, broadly speaking from a parent-educator perspective? And she goes on to ask, what is reinforcement behaviour and what would you do instead? And we might touch on that in a little bit. But in particular, how do you work with a non-verbal client in ASI? You also had a question when you looked at this, what does child therapy look like for non-speaking young people? And we also had another question, advice for practitioners on working with clients diagnosed with ASD and non-verbal clients. So I grouped them all together. Yeah. Because
you're right, similar themes in there.
Yeah, all those questions kind of touched on similar sort of areas of working with non-verbal clients. So you and I have both worked with non-verbal clients and probably still work with non-verbal clients. So I don't know if there's anything that, as a starting point, you go, if you have if a client comes in, whether it's for an assessment or a session that is non-speaking, non-verbal, higher needs, what are some of the go-tos, the first things that you would do in that situation to support that person's needs?
Yeah. I feel like if I was working with someone for the first time, taking the chance to observe and get to know them a little bit at the beginning is just so important. So having them, initially access whatever space that you're using, letting them move and explore, seeing if there's anything that they'll gravitate towards. And when you were mentioning around that child-led aspect before, I know that's a big part of what we do. We love getting young people's ideas and we want their input. And even like the activity that you were describing before, you come up with a game, whatever you come up with, we'll play together. can obviously look a little bit different for a young person who has communication differences or those higher needs where perhaps more scaffolding is required for what they're engaging with.
Yeah, and things like intellectual disability where planning and generating ideas is really hard.
Really tricky. But I think we can still be child-led by seeing what they're interested in. And if we end up setting up something from that, then looking for those indicators from them that they're enjoying what you're doing, tolerating that activity. Are they, just those classic things? Are they smiling or indicating they want more? Are they moving away and trying to access something else? Is that maybe telling you that something about the activity is not quite right? But I think a really slow approach too is super helpful. So not starting too crazy, just keeping it really simple, but then you're getting really quick feedback about what their capabilities look like, where their strengths lie, what things are trickier, and then you can build and grade from there. Is that how you typically approach something as well with?
Yeah, I think so. I always have the mentality, or the first thing I often do, and this came back from conversations very early on in my OT career when talking with our national director Dino, about working with those high needs clients. He would always talk about keeping one thing, keeping low to the ground and keeping very slow, predictable movements. Yeah. Always being in a position where that person can see you, as opposed to being behind where you're out of vision and then they're sort of unfamiliar with where you are. So trying to keep that presence there where you can, but being quite slow and low to the ground. And also he talks a lot about, and you've heard this a lot, that exposed retreat approach. And what the exposed retreat approach is essentially, as you said, give that person time and space to come into the room, give them the opportunity to assess their environment, become more comfortable with that without any demands placed on them. And in the background, you can potentially set up, say if it's a swing or an activity or a piece of equipment, or even if it's just like a puzzle on the floor, you're exposing that person to that activity that you're suggesting without telling them that's what you're doing. Yeah. And then taking a step back and allowing them time to see if that's something they want to go to.
Absolutely.
And in that way, it becomes, without having to use any words, it becomes a way that they can then see a change in the environment. And I think one thing I'd say for a lot of, I guess it's a generalisation that a lot of autistic clients or a lot of autistic people do have more effective visual skills in some component.
Yeah, very strong.
But I would say that it is more common that a lot of the non-verbal or non-speaking clients prefer to have something visual because that makes more sense to them than lots of words.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if you change something in the environment, then they're going to see a change, and then they'll make a decision about whether that's something they want to be involved in. So low to the ground, slow controlled movements, exposed retreat is where I would start. Also with language, I think it's that balance between being able to, a podcast like this, I'm talking way too much, right? But for a lot of those clients, I think what I'm trying to do is address them first and use their name or get their attention before I deliver an instruction. And a lot of it is very simple phrases or one or two options or choices. Yeah. And when you talked about what does child-led therapy look like, I was actually talking to one of our newer graduate OTs the other day, and he was asking a question about, look, I've got this client, he's a teenage boy, has a limited verbal expression, but his receptive language is okay. Yeah. How can I make sessions look child-led or client-led when he does find it hard to make decisions. Yeah. Or he finds it hard to know what to do.
Yeah, come up with ideas. Yeah.
And that's a real case, a real scenario. And I think in that situation, my gut feel is always to give a couple of choices or a couple of options. And you said that before almost. You said like you'll be able to see whether or not that person, the young person, is liking what they're doing. Yeah. And are they able to make that choice, and if they do make that choice, this is something they're happy with. So is that something that you would also do, or how would you engage, say, a client where there is difficulties with language, how would you encourage child-led therapy?
Yeah. And I think it's such an important question. I think about a beautiful teenage client that I work with who is non-speaking, high support needs. So when I think about our sessions together, he might take my hand and guide me over to use something. So, I mean, that's great. I want to encourage that from him. So it's like, that's awesome. Let's get that set up. But I suppose what those next steps look like, he'll need that help from me in guiding what it looks like. But he's someone I can always tell if I've hit the mark, because he'll smile and he'll giggle and he'll maintain his engagement. If it's not working, he is someone that will move away, guide me towards something else. And I go, okay, so I didn't quite get that right for him there. Or even sometimes actually if I set up something new and he'll engage initially, then move away, he might go to something more familiar after that point. But I always leave it set up, because there'll be times he'll make the choice to come back. And then I'll go, okay, awesome. So we just needed a break from doing something different, working through that, do something familiar, help maybe manage any anxiousness or heightened arousal levels I might be experiencing. But I'm not interested. So I'll come back when I'm ready. And I think that's a really big thing too, is holding that space is really powerful.
You mentioned actually in that heightened arousal level or arousal levels. And one thing just that I've completely forgot to mention from the get-go is understanding the arousal level of that young person when they come in, and really trying to go, regardless of what we're suggesting or what we'd like them to do or what we would like them to choose in the space, is to observe and try and find where their arousal level is at and meet their needs. So to really try and maintain that optimal level of arousal means that if they are moving around a lot, I'm going to try and suggest or expose them to an activity that's going to increase their need for movement.
Yeah, for sure.
Or if they're sitting still, they're not quite sure, I'm going to go, okay, they're maybe needing something to either pick them up, or they're really conscious of their environment. Therefore, I'll bring something to them that's less dynamic, that might get them engaged, say a puzzle or a game. Yeah. That then might, pique their interest into what else is in the space.
Yeah, for sure.
And that arousal level is key, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think some of my friends who maybe have higher support needs, when they're entering the space, there might be things they typically go for in the initial instance, but I feel really comfortable having something familiar in the initial stages, something that's really regulating from then. A gorgeous friend of mine who I just throw around in the swing for 15 minutes, but once I've had the chance to do that and regulate, I'll then build out from that, and he'll be so happy to watch me try something or attempt something. But I wouldn't lead with that. I need to give him the space to regulate first. But then I think that's probably another point too, using things of interest for them in terms of equipment that they enjoy, but then seeing how you might be able to extend and grade in a way that feels manageable for them. And I think the more, speaking to the visual aspects you're talking about, the more you can model those activities too. And there'll be times where you want that young person to try and work through that without perhaps seeing it first, to see what their planning and problem solving looks like. But sometimes if you're doing something new with that exposed retreat, part of that might be showing, well, this is what it can look like, taking the step back and seeing if they'll come and explore from there.
I think you mentioned about that modelling or that exposed retreat. I think that's really important, because sometimes you can lose a client or the arousal level can really shoot up if you're giving them something that might be too challenging, or giving them something that isn't quite meeting their just right challenge. And that sort of ties into, some of the question here comes, a couple of questions come from therapists, from OTs that are wanting to know how to support non-speaking clients or high needs clients using ASI therapy. And I often there will refer back to the fidelity measures. So the outlined ways to ensure that you are providing what's considered ASI registered trademark therapy.
Yeah.
And within that, it is understanding and challenging praxis or planning but understanding that it also needs to be a just right challenge,
Yeah.
finding motivation of the child, targeting particular sensory areas. And if all of those things are met in one way or the other, then you can say that the therapy does meet that fidelity.
Yeah.
But that's from a therapy perspective. But I would certainly argue you could do that same approach if you're a parent or an educator or a caregiver or someone just in the activities you're doing at home, to understand, okay, am I finding a just right challenge for this young person, for my child, or am I making sure that what we're doing is of an interest to them and is motivating for them? Am I being, am I observing where they're at and finding that just right arousal level?
Yeah.
And so all those things come into play there. And I think the biggest challenge for a lot of these non-speaking clients is the fact that you don't get the verbal responses, or you can't get that. So you're having to do a lot more reading of the non-verbal cues.
Yes, very, very true.
And that's, if you can do that, then that helps. That helps a long way. It goes a long way in helping understand what that person's actually trying to indicate. And that's where I think for me it comes back to, if I can see how that person is moving their body, then that's giving me an indication of what they're actually needing.
Yeah. And I think if you can take it at that pace and build that trust, and in reading those nonverbal cues for that young person and what their communication preferences look like, I actually find with some of my non-speaking friends, when I think about that communication and the strength of that in some of those sessions, it's really solid, and it can look, if you know how to read each other and you take the time to learn to do that. And like you mentioned, because of that verbal language might not be as prevalent, I think it's really natural as a therapist in that space to want to fill that with increased language ourselves. But actually, I think the less you can talk, the better. That might be something I should work on more broadly. The
Feedback.
Constant joke that I talk too much, which is really why they've got me on here. But I think in those sessions, it might feel a bit uncomfortable if you're working with someone to start off with, but then once you realise that that's making that environment really safe, you're not overloading that young person with lots of verbal language that they're trying to process and work through, pick out parts that they understand, in addition to work out what you're trying to get them to do. Keeping it, like you said, to that real simple language and using other means to communicate. And
also I find that, it's labeling what you're seeing, going, we're using the swing, or you're looking, you're happy on there, and putting key phrases in there to help label what's going on, or to help, so we're going to move to this activity next, or, to help put the words to support where maybe they find it hard to do that, but to at least give a bit of a structure. And it gives you a chance to say, look, I want to communicate with you. And look, most of our communication is nonverbal anyway.
Yeah.
The majority of communication is nonverbal. I think back, I was talking about this with an OT the other week, talking about nonverbal clients, and I was talking about I don't know if you've seen there's the Daft Punk movie Interstellar 5555.
No, I haven't.
So anyway, I don't know if Eli, the producer, has seen it. Yes, great film, no words.
Oh,
right.
very
So
cool.
it's an animated movie, about an hour and a half long. And it goes through the entire Daft Punk album of Discovery, and
so good.
in sequence, but it's all visual, and you know exactly what's going on through that movie without any dialogue in there.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And I can recount that movie so well because of the vividness of that visual information. And there's some music along to it as well that helps. And we can do another episode about how music helps us retain information.
Yes.
but at the same time, it's just a prime example of sometimes words can be so abstract, but the visual can give you so much information.
Yeah.
And the non-verbals as a form of communication, are so key. So if someone takes your hand, you know that you want that they want you to come with them. You have that connection. It's really important, I think, going back to the original question of when we're working with a young person that's nonverbal, is if you have that level of trust, you can use physical touch as a way to support, if that client is tolerant of it, obviously.
Yeah.
But you can use that as a way to show connection, to show that ability to go, I'm here and I understand what you need, and you can use nonverbals where you need to help us get through what we want to get through.
Yeah, for sure. I know you can't can't always jump into that or has to be guided by that young person
Absolutely.
to begin with. And yeah, you think, like you said, the trust and giving the time in the relationship. I feel like we talked about lots of things just then. So if I was to like jump in with things that I might miss, if I do a real quick recap, so working with non-speaking young people, some really key things to think about is regulation in the initial instance. So understanding their sensory needs and preferences and making sure that we're giving them the chance to organise and settle. We're looking at things, that low and slow approach, things that are low to the ground with controlled movements. You were talking a lot about that just right challenge. So, you know, that's making sure that it's pitched at a level that they can have a degree of success. It's not too easy, that it's not challenging for them, but it's not so hard that they're not able to achieve that. It's finding a way that they can plan and problem solve, but have success within that. And I think reducing that verbal language was another really key one, really cueing into that non-verbal communication, not only for that young person, but also in how you're communicating with them as well. And using areas of the strengths and interests to motivate.
Expose, retreat.
Expose, retreat, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that works.
And that modelling to show them, and because they might not gravitate towards that. So yeah, expose, retreat is such a good tool to have in your toolbox working with these young people.
And they're not always going to gravitate towards what maybe you thought they would or what you want them to. And you know, for any new graduate out there, session plans in ASI don't always work.
No.
You can have a bit of an idea, but if it's truly child-led, Suzanne Smith-Rowley would say, you got to let them have it. Let them have control. Sorry, that's a bad accent, Suzanne, if you're listening. There was a second part to that question that did come from Melissa that I did want to mention, and she talked about what is reinforcement behaviour and what would you do instead. Now, that's slightly separate, but important to, I guess, to cover or to touch on, because we did do a previous episode in December. We touched on ABA, and that therapy does utilise reinforcement consistently in its approach, and different to what we do in ASI. And obviously there's a role for ABA therapy as well. But I think in her question about what would you do instead of reinforcement behaviour, I think it's also important to just outline what reinforcement behaviour looks like. So I guess for those that don't know, that reinforcement behaviour does come more from a positive behavioural psychology approach. So there's sort of positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is, you know, adding something desirable. So, you know, a child gets a toy, a reward or something for doing something. There's the increased likelihood that behaviour will continue. Yeah. So, you know, if you keep doing this, I will give you this reinforcer, and therefore you'll keep doing that behaviour. And negative reinforcement is that removal of something unpleasant. So it could be a child's directed to a waiting chair or has to sit each time in that chair if they're unsafe or they're finding it hard to make effective decisions. And the aim is to encourage that child to reduce those behaviours due to not wanting to sit on that chair. Yeah. So both are reinforcing. And I guess the point of difference that I want to just reinforce, to clarify that the negative reinforcement is different to like a punishment where, you know, the aim is to reduce or get rid of that behaviour by taking something away. Yeah. As opposed to look, I'm going to reinforce that that's not something you want by going and sitting in that chair. I don't want you there. You don't want to be there. So let's try and do something else to get away from that. Yeah. Away from that chair. I mean, some you know, other examples include, you know, leaving the fridge open, that beep, 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 beep. Yeah. Don't leave your fridge open. The beep will annoy you. You know, or a seatbelt indicator saying, you know, beep, beep, beep every time you don't have your seatbelt on to say, wear your seatbelt. Yeah. You know, that's kind of a negative.
Do those noises annoy you, Michael?
They're designed to do that, though. They're designed to be prompts in your mind, right? So they're not too bad. But I guess that's, so in a nutshell, that's kind of that reinforcement approach. And I mean, I would argue, I mean, you might use it as well, but I do use positive reinforcement in my sessions. Not so much if you do this activity, you can have that. It's more about, hey, you know what? You gave that a really good go. You can choose an activity next, or my choice, your choice. I choose one activity, and for, you know, trying something that I'd like to do, you can choose something, and I'll do what you do. You know? And that's, I guess that's another form of reinforcement, that you're trying to see that by trying someone else's idea, that's reinforcing that it's good to try other people's ideas and that you can be open to different things, because I know that can be a challenge for some people. So it is different to what we do in ASI.
Yeah.
And we don't use a lot of reinforcement, and it's not one of the fundamentals of air sensor integration therapy at all.
No.
But as an OT, using OT principles, there can be a place for reinforcement. And I guess the question is, one, what is reinforcement behaviour? So I've just done a quick explanation there. And what would you do instead of reinforcement? And I think it comes back to, if you're doing ASA right, then it's child-led and you wouldn't need to be doing too much reinforcement. Yeah.
I guess for me, maybe it's more like guidance in a session. So if we're doing something, an activity, and the young friend that we're working with maybe finds planning through different movements that a little bit more challenging, but then they attempt something and you're like, oh, I really liked how you used your hand to grab a hold of that. Seemed like that really helped your body to move across. I guess that's enforcement in a way, but not in the same way as we're then giving there's no currency involved with that. It's more like a scaffolding or a guidance, but it's still trying to draw awareness to that young person as something that they're intrinsically doing, I suppose, where they've made that choice. You're trying to indicate, well, it seems like that's kind of working out and helping you work towards your goal. Yeah. But I guess it's more collaborative.
Yeah, and that is different. That is different to a reinforcement itself, because there's no sort of, you're not adding in something desirable there. You're observing something that's adding to their success in a task, and you're just helping them scaffold and helping them support and I guess reinforcing that is good without it being a reinforcement.
Exactly. And I think
words.
just wanted to throw that in there to differentiate between that. And it's interesting, even like what you said about the your choice, my choice. I often use that in a session format. Some of my young friends really respond to having things written down so they can see kind of what the flow of the session's going to look like, and they'll help them prepare when it's time to finish and transition and come out to see mum or dad. And that, I guess, implementing that is intended to be for structure, predictability. They can see what's coming ahead, rather than because we did this, you can then choose the next thing. I think that can be something in your toolbox that you're using for different purposes. Yeah. Which is just, something I was thinking as you were talking as well.
No, absolutely. And I think, you reframe that. And I agree when I'm talking about the sort of my choice, your choice, you're right. It's probably less of I'm doing this to reinforce a particular behaviour and more about like
celebrating.
Yeah. Like I can see that there's benefit in sharing other people's ideas, or for me to have a bit of a say in an activity, and for you to see that that's a positive thing to have that social skill being built.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I guess then in answering, what could we be doing instead? I think that those examples probably speak to how important that collaboration aspect is. So you're working together. It's not necessarily an exchange, and following their lead, following their ideas, building that trust. Then you can add in your own. And I think sometimes reducing the demand as well can be a helpful way. So if you're trying to use that to go, well, I'd love for you to try my idea, rather than using some form of reinforcement, well, I'd love for you to try my idea. If you don't try my idea, we're not going to do your idea. I guess reducing that a little bit, going, oh, okay, well, I think maybe I could have a turn. For my turn, I'd love to set it up this way. That you don't have to do it. That's totally fine, but I'm going to give it a go like this, which is probably once again speaking to that expose retreat. And I'd be questioning too, if they're not wanting to do something, what are they trying to communicate with you in that moment? Is it that the demand was too high? Is it that that's not aligned with their interests? Like, what is it about it that's making them not want to engage? Because then is that an opportunity to chat things through, set things up differently, try a different approach? Just, I guess, it's always a communication piece.
And you can do that whether they are speaking or non-speaking.
Yeah.
Because you will see it either. You'll know it straight away, verbal or non-verbal. Yeah. You will get some feedback. So thank you for chatting that last bit through. Hopefully that provided a bit more of an answer. And overall, I think when working with those non-speaking high needs clients, there is a range of ways, and yes, some people use reinforcement, and that's a slightly different approach. But from an ASI perspective, or the sort of play-based OT that we use, I think there's a lot of ways to experience and achieve success without needing a direct reinforcer for particular ways of doing things.
Yeah.
Should we end it there?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, again, as I mentioned at the top, questions, please send them through to our Instagram or to the email address that we have as well. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.